Hello, I'm Anavoltus, and I would like to talk about why my particular uh, political ideology is not libertarian as it has been supposed by some. So I actually took a bit of a political compass, not necessarily of my own personal ideas, but rather the ideas of the political ideology, and it usually I've done this more than once, and this is one example. It usually is not on the libertarian side of things, and even being on the libertarian side on this type of chart doesn't really mean necessarily that you're a libertarian. Uh, I am generally a bit farther down on the libertarian side if I had taken it from my own personal views, but from the views of the government that I am designing, it is always generally above on the authoritarian side of things. Although it's never up way up towards the top, though. It's usually sort of center area, but always more on the authoritarian side of things. So you might say, why is my particular ideology considered by some to be similar to libertarianism? Well, the answer to that is rather complex, but it comes from my idea of decentralization and communal liberty, where I have social and economic policies being decentralized to the local level. Now, I think it's very important to make a distinction between decentralization and liberalization, in the sense that when I say that these ideas, these social and economic policies are decentralized, what I am not saying is that they are not being legislated on at all, or that the limitation of legislation exists. That's not what I am saying when I am saying that they are decentralized. What I am simply saying is that the same degree of authority that would exist if a government were to centrally plan such things would instead exist on the local level, which would also include the liberty to actually have a libertarian type government. However, it does not necessarily mean that, in the sense that, in theory, you could have a an ethno-fascist dictatorship, so long as it does not violate certain constitutional provisos. It would actually be allowable. Same thing with communism. That would also be allowable to some extent, so long as it does not violate certain constitutional provisos. Same thing with monarchism. If you want to have a little king, you can have that, as long as you give regular referendums on whether or not you want to keep having a king. That's something that is all allowable under my system. So to say that my system is particularly libertarian is, in my view, inaccurate, because especially if you simply come to that from the viewpoint, well, it is decentralized, so even if there is potentially a large degree of autonomy and power on the local level, isn't that also allowable under a libertarian system? Well, that's not exactly necessarily true, because this certainly is not a Hoppian type system. Because if you look at other decentralized systems in history, you can look at the system of overlapping hegemonies that existed in ancient Mesopotamia, and that certainly would not be considered a libertarian system by any means. Or how there was a lot of local autonomy for various cities in the Roman Republic. That also is not considered to be a libertarian system. And medieval feudalism, in which there exists a high degree of local autonomy and decentralization, is also not a libertarian system. So I would say that decentralization certainly is not an exclusive or even central or essential portion of libertarianism. And in fact, from a philosophical axis, the point where my worldview is distinct from that of the libertarian, the point where the lineage actually distinguishes is before liberalism. What I mean by that is I side with the Cavaliers and not the Roundheads. So, from that perspective, I haven't really gone into liberalism at all. And the reason why my ideology has liberal elements is because they are advantageous, not for the popularity of the ideology, but for, in my view, the function of a society and the function of a government. Not because I view freedom as a moral good in any sense, and not because I view natural law as being real in any sense. In fact, I view natural law as not being real, and prefer instead to view a justice not as being derived from nature, but as being derived from authority. In that sense, I view liberties and freedoms as not something that is inherent to each person, but rather something that is gained through the power and the generosity of the government. And as such, the government in itself is what must be respected. And that's why I oppose revolutionary ideologies, uh, or at least the revolutionary aspects of such ideologies, in the sense that, as I said, I side with the Cavaliers and not the Roundheads, because the Roundheads are rebelling against their government, and the government is legitimate by the power that it exercises. And therefore, to rebel against such a power, to rebel against the very establishment of the justice in one society, is, in my view, always evil. Now, this also is related to my particular religious views, but I guess a reference to that would be if you were to read John Jewell's An Homily Against Disobedience and Willful Rebellion. I think that very well summarizes my theological views regarding authority. So I will say that liberty, in my ideology, is not something that is gained by means of enlightenment philosophical ideas of natural law and popular sovereignty and social contract theory, but rather from the idea that it is indeed a form of exploitation, in the sense that the reason why I say liberty is, in my system, a form of exploitation is because it is exploiting the minds of the people in order to improve the quality of the government by creating interlocking webs of trust. And when I use the word exploitation, I do not use it in a negative sense, but rather in the sense that it is a use of something. So it is like the exploitation of a resource that is otherwise untapped. So I say that otherwise, in oligarchic systems and systems of aristocracy, what you have is a situation where there is a limited potential for problem solving due to the limitation of class of individuals that can be involved within the problem solving. But what I say is that democracy on a local level allows for all the people in that community to be involved in the problem solving for the problems of that community, which I see as a greater way to get better informed results, and results that are, in my view, superior to central planning. Now, that being said, I also say, for the same reason, that such individuals would not be allowed to vote on higher levels of government, because at that point their expertise would not be valuable, because higher levels of government end up in being involved in such things such as international diplomacy, which is something that I do not trust the average citizen to be sufficiently informed about to have a relevant expertise. And that's why I also, in my system, advocate for a system, well, not necessarily an established system, but what essentially would create a system of career politicians that derive their careers from the previously established web of trust, the chain of reliability that exists. Because I say that on a local level, the people being the most trustworthy are able to elect leaders that can reliably said to be trustworthy. And those leaders, being men of good moral character, would coming together as fellow men of good moral character would probably elect other men of good moral character that they would trust not to deprive of themselves the liberties that they have. And as such, I believe that this would actually create a refinement wherein the top levels of government would be much more trustworthy than they are in a system wherein they would be elected directly, because now there is indeed personal relationships that are holding this all together, because they have a proximity with each other that allows them to have such relationships, as opposed to, let's say, if the whole country were to be involved in the election, where the vast majority of people could not be expected to have the expertise of the personal relationship with the leaders in order to accurately gauge the quality of the leaders. So ultimately, I will say that my system, therefore, by philosophical rejection of the foundations of liberalism and libertarianism, is not liberal and is not libertarian, at least in the classical or contemporary senses of the terms. Now, I will say that my system is indeed liberal in the sense that it gives a tremendous amount of freedom in how people can run their local governments, which is something that currently does not exist in any country, except countries wherein the government has collapsed, in which case I would say it would not necessarily be what I'm looking for, because I'm actually looking for a state that is reliable. So there you go. So I'm still a bit ill from previously, so that's why I may be talking a bit weirdly or strangely or queerly or whichever word you want to use. So thank you all for listening or watching. Tell me what you think. Is there something particular that you want me to address? If there is a misunderstanding of a particular element of what I have said, please do tell me, because I want to ensure that my words are clear and that my intentions are carried by my communication. Because remember, the meaning of what I am saying is determined by what I am trying to say, and not necessarily by what your interpretation thereof is. So I don't want people to misrepresent my views as being different from what they actually are. So thank you all for watching. You can always donate on Patreon. I'll probably start putting the links back into the descriptions of my videos. I should probably put a higher effort into making my videos more. So ultimately, I will say that my system is neutral towards libertarianism, in that it allows libertarianism to exist while also allowing non-libertarian systems to exist in parallel. So thank you all for watching, and I'll be seeing you all next time on Wiltus. Over and out.